What does it feel like to be a ghost in your own home? I know. It feels like the constant, low-grade hum of a refrigerator you can't quite place. It's the subtle chill in a room that should be warm. It's the prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you're completely alone, the unshakable feeling that you are being watched. For 3 months I'd been living like that. I blamed the renovation, the dust, the displaced furniture, the constant presence of strangers. My wife Holly and I had saved for years to turn our modest house into a home, a real home, a sanctuary for the family we hoped to start. But our sanctuary had started to feel like a prison, and I was about to find out why. It all started, as most of my problems did, with Holly's parents. Margaret and Philip. On the surface, they are the model in-laws. Pillars of their small community, church-going, charity gala-hosting people, with perfect teeth and even more perfect plausible deniability. To them, Holly was a porcelain doll to be kept on a pristine shelf, and I was the bumbling oaf who'd somehow managed to take her out of the box. Their love for her was a smothering, possessive thing, and their tolerance of me was a thin veneer over a core of pure, unadulterated condescension. When we announced the renovation, they were ecstatic. Not for us, of course, but for the opportunity it presented. "Oh, you can't just hire any old builder, Conrad," Margaret had said, her voice dripping with the syrupy concern she used to disguise her commands. "You need someone trustworthy. Someone who understands family." And that's how we ended up with Gavin, their trusted family contractor. He was a weaselly man with shifty eyes and a scent of stale cigarettes and desperation. His work was agonizingly slow, punctuated by long, unexplained absences. He worked at the oddest hours, sometimes showing up at 10 at night to finish up some wiring, a task that seemed to take hours of silent standing in half-finished rooms. Holly, bless her heart, saw it as dedication. I saw it as weird. Deeply, fundamentally weird. But I was the son-in-law. My job was to smile, nod, and pay the invoices that were already starting to climb, well past the initial quote. It wasn't about the money. It was about the control. It was always about the control. The inciting incident, the moment the curtain was torn away, happened on a Tuesday night. It was late, almost midnight. Holly was asleep upstairs, exhausted from her job as a pediatric nurse. I was on the main floor, trying to feel some semblance of progress by doing a little work myself. Gavin had left a gaping hole in the drywall of the living room, a casualty of some mysterious rewiring effort. I was tired of looking at it. I had a fresh sheet of drywall, a tub of spackle, and a stubborn desire to accomplish something, anything, tangible. I measured, I cut, I fitted the new piece into place. As I pushed it flush against the studs, my fingers brushed against something that shouldn't have been there. Tucked inside the wall cavity, taped to a 2x4, was a small plastic lump. It was smooth and dense, not a wood knot or a stray bit of plaster. Curiosity, that fatal human impulse, took over. I fished my utility knife out of my pocket and carefully cut away a larger section of the drywall around the spot. And there it was. It wasn't a lump. It was a device. Small, black, and utterly alien in the dusty cavity of my wall. It was no bigger than my thumb, but two thin insulated wires snaked from its base, leading down and disappearing behind the wall. I followed them with my fingers until they met a thicker orange cable, the Romex for the nearby electrical outlet. The wires from the device were spliced directly into our home's electrical system. My blood went cold. This wasn't a forgotten tool. It wasn't a piece of junk. I've always been a tech guy. My career is in software development. I know hardware when I see it. This was sophisticated. A microphone, powered indefinitely by my own electricity. It was a bug, a listening device, tucked away in the wall of my living room, transmitting every word, every argument, every laugh, every whispered intimacy between my wife and me to God knows who. But I knew. Of course I knew. The trusted family contractor. The bizarre hours. The endless, pointless wiring. It all clicked into place with the sickening finality of a cell door locking shut. This wasn't shoddy work. It was a surveillance operation. And my overbearing, meddling, concerned in-laws were the ones behind the control panel. For a moment I just stared, my mind a screaming void. The humming in the house wasn't the refrigerator. It was this. The feeling of being watched wasn't paranoia. It was reality. I felt a surge of white-hot rage that was so intense it made me dizzy. I wanted to rip it out of the wall. I wanted to storm over to Margaret and Philip's immaculate, manicured home and smash it on their perfectly polished mahogany dining table. I wanted to find Gavin and tear him apart with my bare hands. But then a different instinct took over, a colder, quieter one. If there was one, there were more. Gavin's work van, a decrepit white Ford Econoline, was still parked at the curb. He'd told us he had an early start, a few towns over, and it was easier to just leave it overnight. Another lie. I slipped on my shoes, my heart hammering against my ribs, and went outside into the damp night air. The street was silent. The van's windows were fogged over. I pulled on the handle of the side door, unlocked. Of course it was. Arrogance makes you sloppy. The inside of the van was a disaster of tools, fast food wrappers, and dust. But on the passenger seat, tucked inside a worn cardboard box for a drill bit set, was the motherlode. They weren't even hidden. A dozen more of them, 12 identical black listening devices, each with its own tiny spool of wiring, and beside them, a roll of electrical tape and a set of wire strippers. It was a spy's toolkit. I stood there in the dark, the faint glow of a street light glinting off the plastic in my hand. The rage had subsided, replaced by an icy calm that terrified me. The scale of it, this wasn't just one bug. This was a plan to wire my entire home. The living room, the kitchen, the dining room, our bedroom, the nursery we'd just started painting. Every corner of our lives was to be an open book for them. I closed the box, put it back exactly where I found it, and gently shut the van door, making no sound. I walked back into my house, the house that was no longer mine, and looked at the hole in the wall. The little black parasite was still there, patiently listening to my silence, listening to my heartbreak, listening to the last vestiges of the man I used to be, the accommodating, peacekeeping, turn-the-other-cheek son-in-law, die. A new man was born in that moment, forged in betrayal and powered by a resolve as cold and hard as the device in my wall. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. But as I stood there in the ruins of my own privacy, I knew one thing for certain: it was about to be. The first hour after finding the bugs was a blur of pure, unadulterated panic. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct, the primal male urge to protect my home, was to grab a hammer and start smashing. I wanted to tear down every wall, rip out every wire, and pile the electronic guts of this betrayal in the middle of the floor. I paced the living room like a caged animal, my mind racing. Every creak of the old house sounded like a shutter clicking. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden lens. My home, my sanctuary, had been transformed into a hostile environment. It felt contaminated, violated on a microscopic level. I couldn't breathe properly. The biggest, most agonizing question was Holly. My Holly, the center of my world. How could I tell her that her own parents, the people she loved and defended despite their overbearing nature, had committed such a monstrous act? She saw them as flawed but fiercely loving. She would be devastated. The revelation wouldn't just break her heart, it would shatter the entire foundation of her life, her childhood, her identity. A darker, more insidious thought crept in. What if she knew? I hated myself for even thinking it, but the seed of doubt, once planted, is a stubborn weed. Had she been in on it? Was her defense of them, her insistence on using Gavin, part of the plan? Was I not just the mark but the fool, played by everyone, including the person I trusted most? My stomach twisted into a knot of acid and fear. The thought was a physical blow. I had to lean against the wall, the very wall that was spying on me, to keep from falling. I looked up the stairs toward our bedroom, where she was sleeping peacefully, and I felt a chasm open between us. A dark canyon of suspicion carved out by her parents' crime. It was a testament to their toxicity that their first victim wasn't my privacy, but my faith in my own wife. No. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the poison. No, not Holly. She was a nurse. She spent her days comforting sick children and reassuring terrified parents. Her soul was pure kindness. She could be naive. Yes. She could be too forgiving of her parents' faults. Absolutely. But she was not malicious. She was a victim in this. Same as me. They were using her love and trust as a weapon against us both. Realizing this didn't lessen my anger. It focused it. This wasn't just an attack on me anymore. It was an attack on her, on our marriage. To understand how we got here, you have to understand the history. It's not a single act, but a long, slow erosion of boundaries. A death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one delivered with a loving smile. I remember our wedding planning. It was supposed to be our day, a celebration of our love. It quickly became the Margaret and Philip show. Margaret had opinions on everything, from the font on the invitations to the flavor of the cake. My opinions were interesting, which was her code for stupid and to be ignored. Holly's were sweet, but impractical. We wanted a small outdoor ceremony with a folk band. We ended up in a stuffy country club ballroom with a DJ who played a horrifying loop of 80s pop hits because, as Philip explained, we have to consider our guests. Conrad. These are important people. They weren't our guests. They were his business associates and Margaret's social rivals. I was just the groom, a necessary prop in their production. I fought back at first, but every time I put my foot down, Margaret would start to cry, and Philip would pull me aside for a man-to-man talk about not upsetting Holly's mother. Holly, caught in the middle, would just look exhausted and plead with me to let it go for the sake of peace. So I did. I let it go. That was my role, the family shock absorber. Then there was the car. A year into our marriage, my trusty old Civic finally died. We were saving for the house down payment, so our budget was tight. Philip announced, over one of Margaret's famously dry Sunday briskets, that he would help us out. He knew a guy. A very reputable used car dealer. He took me down to the lot himself, steering me toward a specific sedan. It looked clean. The mileage was decent. Philip talked up the owner, his old friend, and assured me he was getting a special family price. I was hesitant, but Philip was so insistent, and Holly was so grateful for her dad's help. I signed the papers. 2 months later, the transmission fell out. My mechanic just laughed when he put it on the lift. The undercarriage was a mess of rust and shoddy patch jobs. It was a classic lemon, polished up for a quick sale. The family price, I later discovered, was $2,000 above Blue Book value. Philip's old friend had given him a $500 kickback for bringing in a sucker. When I confronted him, he didn't even have the grace to be ashamed. A man has to look out for his friends, Conrad, he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. It's just business. Toughen up. I never told Holly the full story. I just said the car had some unexpected problems. I ate the cost. I absorbed the shock. Their campaign against me was subtle but relentless. They'd forget to include me in conversations, turning their bodies to physically block me out of the family circle. They'd tell long, winding stories about Holly's childhood, stories I could never be a part of, reinforcing my status as an outsider. Margaret bought Holly clothes that weren't her style, sent her articles about careers she had no interest in, all under the guise of motherly love. It was a constant, gentle pressure to pull Holly back into their orbit, to remind her that she was a Davenport first, and my wife second. They treated our marriage like a temporary hostage situation from which she would eventually need to be rescued, and I let them. For Holly's sake. I bit my tongue so many times I was surprised it hadn't been worn down to a stump. I played the part of the happy, compliant son-in-law because I loved my wife and she loved her parents, and I thought that my sacrifice was the price of peace. I thought I was being the bigger man. I was wrong. I wasn't being a bigger man. I was being a doormat, and a doormat is something you wipe your feet on before you walk into a house you think you own. Standing there in my living room, the memory of these slights, these erosions, these betrayals, swirled around me, coalescing with the blinking red light I imagined was on the bug in the wall. This wasn't a new development. It was the logical conclusion of their entire philosophy. If you can't control them, listen to them. If you can't break them apart, undermine their every private moment. The catalyst for my resolve came from the enemy itself. I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark on the floor, just watching the hole in the wall. I knew I couldn't rip it out. That would be an act of war, a messy, emotional confrontation that they would win. They were masters of that domain. They would twist it, deny it, and paint me as a paranoid, abusive husband who was tearing the house apart. Holly would be caught in a vortex of gaslighting and guilt. No, that was their game. I had to play mine. My mind started working. The bugs were their weapon. What if I made them my weapon too? I crept back out to Gavin's van. My heart pounded as I pried open the box of new bugs. I took one. Just one. I went back inside, to my small home office at the back of the house, a room Gavin hadn't touched yet. With a precision I didn't know I possessed. I found an outlet behind my desk, pulled it out, and carefully attached the new device, tucking it deep inside the wall box. I then found an app. It was terrifyingly easy, that could scan for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi signals. The device from Gavin's box popped up almost immediately as an unsecured feed. I connected to it. I was listening to myself. Then I went back to the living room. I stood near the original bug, the one they had planted. I took out my phone and pretended to take a call. "Yeah, Mark, it's Conrad," I said. My voice low but clear. "Listen. I can't talk long. Did the wire transfer go through?" "Good. 1.5 million is a lot to have sitting around. Just make sure it's secure in the escrow account until the land deal is finalized." "No. Holly doesn't know about the patent buyout yet. I want to surprise her. Let's just keep this between us for now." I ended the fake call and held my breath. I switched back to the app, connected to the bug in my office. I was listening to the ambient noise of the room, but what I was really listening for was the other bug, the one in the living room. I was hoping it would transmit my little performance to whoever was on the other end. For a long time there was nothing. Then I heard it, a faint vibration through the floorboards. It was my own phone, which I had left on my desk in the office. It was buzzing. A text message. I walked calmly into the office and picked it up. It was from a number I didn't recognize. A single sentence. "Who is Mark?" It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. They had taken the bait. They had heard my performance, and in their greed and paranoia, they couldn't stop themselves from reacting. They had texted a question to the burner phone that I had listed on the original contractor agreement with Gavin, a number I only used for business spam. A number they must have gotten from him. They had just confirmed, in writing, that they were listening. In that moment, everything changed. The fear vanished. The doubt vanished. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was now coated in a layer of something else, something cold and sharp, and crystalline. It was the birth of a plan. The old Conrad, the shock absorber, was gone forever. The new Conrad, the architect of their downfall, was holding a phone with a single damning text message, and he was starting to think about revenge. It wasn't about revenge when I found the bug. It wasn't about revenge when I remembered all the little indignities. But holding that phone, with their digital fingerprint proving their crime. In that moment, oh yes, it was about revenge. And it was going to be total. The plan began to form not as a single brilliant idea, but as a series of cold, logical steps. My first call wasn't to a lawyer or the police. It was to Leo. Leo and I went back to our college dorm days where we'd bonded over late-night coding sessions and a shared disdain for authority. I'd gone into corporate software. He'd veered into the murkier, more interesting world of cybersecurity. He ran his own consulting firm now, a boutique operation that did penetration testing for banks and tech giants. In short, he was a professional troublemaker. A digital ghost who knew how to slip through firewalls and exploit vulnerabilities. He was, in every sense of the word, the perfect man for the job. I called him at 2 a.m. He picked up on the second ring, his voice gravelly but instantly alert. "This better be good, Conrad." I was dreaming I'd finally cracked quantum encryption. "It's better," I said, my voice tight. "I need your help. I'm being spied on." "By my in-laws." There was a pause on the line. Then a low whistle. "Okay," he said. The sleepiness gone from his voice, replaced by the keen interest of a master craftsman examining a rare piece of wood. "Tell me everything." And I did. I told him about Margaret and Philip, about Gavin the contractor, about the slow burn of the renovation, the hole in the wall, the device powered by my own electrical grid, the box of a dozen more in the van. I told him about my fake phone call and the anonymous text message. I laid it all out, the whole sordid, insane story. He listened without interruption. When I was finished, the only sound was the hum of the open line. "Conrad," he finally said, his tone a mix of awe and professional admiration. "You have stumbled into a beautifully dysfunctional hornet's nest. This is exquisite. It's my life, Leo, I said, a tremor of the old fear returning. I know. And we're going to get it back, he said, his voice hardening. First things first, don't touch anything else. Don't confront them. Don't even hint that you know. As of right now, you are the same oblivious, happy-go-lucky son-in-law you were yesterday. They think they have a secret window into your world. We're going to turn that window into a mirror. That one sentence, turn that window into a mirror, became our mantra. It was perfect. They wanted to watch? We'd give them a show. A meticulously crafted, brilliantly executed performance designed for an audience of two. Leo came over the next morning. He looked less like a hacker and more like a grad student, with a messy mop of hair, a faded band t-shirt, and a backpack filled with more processing power than a 1990s NASA control center. He greeted me with a grim smile. All right, let's see the crime scene. He examined the bug in the wall with a surgeon's focus, using a small handheld device to scan it. Okay, so this is an off-the-shelf civilian-grade bug, but it's a good one, he murmured. GSM-based, audio-activated. Draws power from the mains so it never dies. It transmits its audio feed to a designated phone number. Whoever has that phone can just dial in and listen live. Simple, brutal, effective. He looked at me. Your in-laws are not messing around. What about the others in the van? I asked. Let's go take a look. We walked out to Gavin's van, still parked at the curb like a monument to their arrogance. Leo pulled on a pair of thin latex gloves before touching the box. He laid the 12 new bugs out on a clean cloth on the van's floor. Identical, he said. A bulk order. They were planning to wire every room of importance. Living room, kitchen, your office, your bedroom. Jesus. Conrad. He looked at me, his usual joking demeanor gone. This is felony-level stuff. We could burn them to the ground with this. I know, I said, but a legal battle would be ugly. It would destroy Holly. They'd drag it out for years. Paint me as the villain. They'd drain our savings. No. The punishment has to fit the crime. They wanted to listen in on my private life to find a weakness, to get an edge. So I'm going to give them one. And that's when I laid out the second part of the plan. The subplot. Philip, my father-in-law, wasn't just a pillar of the community. He was a self-styled financial wizard. He ran a small exclusive investment club with a handful of his equally smug country club buddies. They were doctors, lawyers, business owners, men who'd done well for themselves and now spent their time trying to outdo each other with risky speculative investments. Philip's entire identity was wrapped up in being the smartest guy in the room, the one with the inside track. His ego was his greatest vulnerability. So we're not just going to feed them lies, I said to Leo. We're going to feed them a very specific, very tempting lie. A get-rich-quick scheme that's too good to be true, but just plausible enough for a greedy man to believe. Leo's eyes lit up. A honeypot. A financial honeypot. Oh, this is getting better and better. And so we began to build our fiction. The first step was to create my windfall. The patent buyout I'd mentioned on my fake call was the seed. We fleshed it out. Years ago, in my early 20s, I developed a small but clever piece of data compression software. I sold it to a startup for a modest sum and moved on. Our story was that this startup had just been acquired by a tech giant, and a forgotten clause in my original contract meant I was entitled to a massive second payout, $1.5 million. It was a life-changing amount of money, but not so outrageously large as to be unbelievable. Step 2 was creating the deal. This was Leo's masterpiece. He spent a day researching local zoning laws, municipal development plans, and fiber optic cable maps. He found the perfect location, a tract of undeveloped, semi-rural land about 20 miles outside of town. It was currently worthless scrubland, but it sat directly adjacent to a major fiber optic trunk line. This, Leo said, pointing to a map on his laptop, is where you're going to build your data center. The story was simple. With my newfound wealth, I was partnering with a silent investor, the fictional Mark, to buy this cheap land before a proposed municipal rezoning went public. Once it was rezoned for commercial use, its value would skyrocket. We would then flip it to a major corporation looking to build a new server farm. The profit margins were astronomical. It was a classic insider trading scenario, the exact kind of deal that would make a man like Philip salivate. Our command center became my small home office. Leo worked his magic. First he did a full sweep of the house. We found 2 more active bugs. One was in the kitchen, tucked behind the backsplash. The other, and this was the one that made me physically ill, was in the smoke detector in the hallway right outside our bedroom door. They could hear everything. Leo disabled them, but made it look like they were still active. He created a closed-loop feed for them. From now on, they wouldn't be listening to the real house. They'd be listening to a soundtrack we controlled. For the bugs that Gavin hadn't planted yet, Leo carefully rewired them. They would still transmit, but they would also send a duplicate signal to a secure server he controlled. We were bugging their bugs. The next phase was the performance. I had to become the man they thought I was trying to hide. A man with a secret, on the verge of a massive financial coup. This required a new level of acting from me. I started taking loud, important-sounding phone calls in the living room, always within earshot of the original bug. I'd use a headset, pacing back and forth, talking to Mark, Leo, using a voice-altering software that made him sound like a gruff, no-nonsense businessman. Mark, the geological survey came back clean. I'd say, my voice filled with excitement. The bedrock is perfect for the server farm foundation. Yeah, the zoning application is filed under the Shell Corporation's name. There's no way to trace it back to us. We just have to stay quiet until the council votes next month. We created fake documents, geological surveys, draft contracts, wire transfer confirmations from a fictitious bank. I'd leave them accidentally open on my laptop screen in the living room when I went to get a coffee. I knew Margaret had a habit of tidying up when she visited, a euphemism for snooping. The true genius of Leo's plan was how we would monitor their reaction. The rewired bugs were our secret weapon. We didn't have to guess if they were taking the bait, we could listen to them swallow it whole. The first time we heard it, it was almost comical. We were huddled over Leo's laptop in my office, headphones on. The audio feed from the bug we'd planted in their home, using one of the spares from Gavin's van, which I'd paid him a bonus to install in their home office, telling him it was a new air quality monitor. Holly wanted for her parents, crackled to life. It was Philip and Margaret, talking in hushed, excited tones after dinner. A data center, Philip whispered, his voice thick with greed. The boy wonder stumbles into a gold mine. That land is worthless now, Maggie. But if he's right about the rezoning, my God. 1.5 million, Margaret breathed. He's just going to keep it for himself? What about Holly? What about the family? Exactly. Philip's voice rose. He's cutting us out. He's cutting Holly out, hiding it from her. The arrogance of that man. After everything we've done for them. Leo and I looked at each other, stifling laughter. It was perfect. They weren't just greedy, they were self-righteous. They were convincing themselves that spying on me and stealing my idea was a morally justified act to protect their daughter's interests. They were building their own cage, and we were just handing them the screws. The final piece of the plan was Gavin. He was their weak link. A desperate man is a pliable man. One afternoon, when he was working alone in the upstairs bathroom, I approached him. I didn't threaten him. I didn't accuse him. I sympathized with him. Gavin, I said, handing him a cold bottle of water. Tough job, this one. Lots of little details. I looked him in the eye. Must be hard, working for people like my in-laws. They can be demanding. He flinched, just slightly. They're fine, he mumbled, not looking at me. I know they're not paying you what you're worth for this kind of specialized work, I continued, my voice low and conspiratorial. I took out my wallet and placed $500 bills on the counter. This is a bonus, from me, for your discretion. I appreciate how you handle their special requests without bothering me or my wife. His eyes widened, darting from the money to my face and back again. He saw that I knew. But he also saw that I wasn't angry. I was offering him an out, a different allegiance. Consider this a down payment, I said. There will be more. A lot more. All you have to do is keep doing exactly what they tell you to do, but from now on you work for me. He snatched the money and stuffed it in his pocket, a silent agreement passing between us. He was their man on the inside. Now he was mine. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. All I had to do was wait for them to make their move. The first move happened a week later. I was on another staged call with Mark, discussing the final crucial step of our fake plan, securing the capital to purchase the land before the zoning vote. I spoke loudly about needing to liquidate some stocks, about the tight deadline. We have to get the full $3 million into the escrow account by the 30th, I said, knowing the bugs were broadcasting my every word. Or the whole deal falls apart. That night, listening in on our feed from their house, we heard Philip making his move. He was on the phone with someone from his investment club. A man named Bob. Bob. It's Philip, he said. His voice slick with false confidence. I've got something. Something big. But it's time sensitive and absolutely confidential. Yes. Bigger than the biotech venture. I've got a source, an impeccable source, on a land deal that's going to pay out 10-1, maybe more. But we have to move now. Leo and I sat in my office, a grim satisfaction settling over us. The fish had not only taken the bait, it was now trying to sell the bait to the rest of the school. Philip spent the next 2 hours on the phone, calling every member of his little club, spinning a tale of inside information and guaranteed profits. He was using my fiction, almost word for word, but presenting it as his own exclusive discovery. The arrogance was breathtaking. He wasn't just stealing my idea, he was repackaging it, branding it, and selling it to his friends as a testament to his own genius. The panic from their side began to build in subtle ways. Gavin, now my informant, told me that Philip had called him, demanding to know the exact layout of my home office. He wanted to know where my desk was, where I kept my files. The quiet surveillance was escalating into active intelligence gathering. Then came the emails. I received a series of phishing attempts, clumsy and obvious, directed at my personal accounts. They were fake security alerts from my bank, password reset requests for my personal portfolio. Leo traced them back easily. The IP address originated from a public library, 2 blocks from my in-laws' house. Margaret, I presumed. It was almost pitiably amateurish. They were getting desperate, trying to find concrete proof of the money they believed I was hiding. The real panic, however, was audible. Our listening post became a theater of escalating anxiety. He's not moving fast enough. Maggie. We heard Philip snap one evening. The vote is in 2 weeks. If he doesn't close the deal, it's all for nothing. Why is he being so cautious? Maybe he doesn't have the full amount. Margaret fretted. You said the buyout was 1.5. The land is 3 million. Where is the rest coming from? His silent partner. Mark. Philip hissed. But what if the partner gets cold feet? We can't rely on Conrad's timing. We have to find a way to get in on this ourselves. We need to beat him to it. That was the moment we were waiting for. They weren't just going to copy my investment. They were going to try to gazump me. They were going to pool their money and try to buy the worthless piece of scrubland themselves, thinking they were executing a brilliant corporate raid. Leo and I accelerated the timeline. On my next call with Mark, I introduced a new element of drama. What do you mean the financing is delayed? I shouted into my headset, pacing the living room frantically. Mark, this is a disaster. The seller has another offer. We have to put up the full $3 million in cash within 72 hours, or we lose the land. They won't accept escrow. It has to be a direct wire transfer to the holding company. Leo had created a website for the fictional Scrubland Pines Holding Company, complete with a corporate address that was actually a P.O. box he'd rented, and wire transfer information that led to an account he'd set up specifically for this purpose. The effect on Philip and Margaret was instantaneous. That night, the conversation we overheard was pure, uncut panic. 72 hours. Margaret shrieked. He's going to lose it, Philip. He's going to fumble the ball right on the 1-yard line. No, Philip said, his voice a low growl of determination. He's not going to lose it. We are. This is our one chance. I'm calling the club. We're liquidating everything. We're going to buy that land. We'll be heroes. Maggie. We'll have saved Holly's inheritance from her incompetent husband. The next day was a frenzy of activity on their end. We listened as Philip cajoled, bullied, and convinced his friends to wire their life savings into our fake holding company's account. He told them he'd mortgaged his own house to make up the difference. He was all in. He was betting the farm, his reputation, and his friends' financial futures on a lie he'd heard through a hole in my wall. The silence on our end was the hardest part. I had to continue the charade, acting like a man on the verge of failure. I made loud, angry calls to my bank. I stomped around the house, sighing dramatically. I had to look, sound, and feel like a man whose dream was slipping through his fingers. Every fiber of my being wanted to smile, to laugh at the sheer poetic justice of it all, but I held it in. The performance had to be perfect until the very end. The silent takeover was nearly complete. Their trust in their own deception was our greatest asset, and we were about to cash it in. The single most difficult and necessary step in this entire operation was telling Holly. For weeks I had carried this secret alone, a toxic knot in my gut. I justified it as protecting her, but the longer I kept it, the more it felt like a betrayal in itself. I was manipulating my own home, my own life, without the consent of the person who shared it with me. Our marriage was a partnership, and I was treating her like a civilian in a war she didn't know was being waged. It was a mirror of her parents' own sin, deciding what was best for her without her knowledge. I couldn't let it continue. If our marriage was going to survive this, it had to be built on a new foundation of absolute, brutal honesty. I chose my moment carefully. It was a Saturday morning. Gavin and his crew were gone for the weekend. The house was quiet. I made her a cup of tea, just the way she likes it, with a splash of milk and a spoonful of honey. She was sitting at our small kitchen table, sketching in a notebook, a rare moment of peace for her. She looked beautiful, the morning light catching the stray strands of blonde hair that had escaped her messy bun. My heart ached. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of her peaceful morning. "Holly," I began, my voice unsteady. "We need to talk, and I need you to just listen until I'm finished. Please." She looked up, her blue eyes filled with concern at my tone. She put her pencil down and gave me her full attention. I didn't start with the accusations. I started with the evidence. I walked over to the section of wall in the living room, the one I had patched over but not painted. I took a utility knife and carefully cut the square open again. I reached inside and pulled out the small black device, its wires dangling like severed nerves. I placed it on the table in front of her. "I found this a few weeks ago," I said softly. "It's a listening device." It was wired directly into the electrical outlet. She stared at it, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. What is that? Is that from the renovation, some kind of old?" "No," I said, cutting her off gently. I then went to my office and came back with the cardboard box from Gavin's van. I opened it and showed her the 12 identical devices nestled inside, and I found these in Gavin's van the same night. Holly looked from the bugs to my face, her mind clearly struggling to process the implication. "Gavin? Why would Gavin?" "I don't understand, Conrad. Is someone trying to rob us?" This was the hardest part. I took a deep breath. "It's not Gavin. He's just the tool. The people who hired him, the people who are listening to us, are your parents." The color drained from her face. "What? No. Don't be ridiculous. My parents would never. That's an insane thing to say." Her voice was sharp, defensive. The protective walls were going up, just as I'd feared. "I know it sounds insane," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Which is why I didn't want to tell you without proof." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. I had isolated a specific recording from the bug Leo and I had planted in their home office. It was the conversation they'd had the night after my first fake phone call about the windfall. I pressed play. First came Philip's voice, dripping with that familiar smug condescension the boy wonder stumbles into a gold mine. Then Margaret's, full of that cloying, false concern. 1.5 million. He's just going to keep it for himself? What about Holly? What about the family? I watched Holly's face as she listened. Her defensiveness began to crumble, replaced by a look of profound shock. Her hand went to her mouth. Then came Philip's damning line. "He's cutting us out. He's cutting Holly out, hiding it from her." The arrogance of that man. After everything we've done for them. I stopped the recording. The silence in our kitchen was absolute. Holly didn't move. She just stared at my phone. Her eyes wide with horror. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "They think I'm hiding money from you," I said softly. "They think I'm cheating you." So they decided to spy on every single word we say in our own home. In our bedroom, Holly. Outside the room we were painting for our baby. She finally looked at me. Her face a mask of agony. "The smoke detector," she whispered. We'd had a conversation just a few nights ago, standing right under it, talking about baby names. She understood. The dam broke. She wasn't angry at me, she was devastated. The sobs came from deep within her, a raw, wrenching sound of a world breaking apart. I went to her, wrapped my arms around her, and just held her as she cried. She wasn't crying for the loss of privacy, she was crying for the loss of a myth. The myth of her loving, protective parents. In its place was the grotesque reality of two paranoid, controlling people who saw their own daughter not as a person but as a possession, and her husband as a thief. This moment, this terrible, necessary moment, was our family exodus. It was the point of no return. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back and looked at me, her eyes red but clear with a new hard resolve I had never seen before. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. I told her everything. The full plan. Leo, the honeypot, the fake land deal, Philip's investment club, my control over Gavin. I laid out the entire silent war I had been waging. As I spoke, I saw the last of her grief burn away, replaced by a cold fire. She wasn't my naive, peacekeeping wife anymore. They had broken that part of her. "They're going to lose everything," she said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. A judgment. Everything. I confirmed. Their money, their reputation, their friends, everything. They value more than their own daughter's happiness. "Good," she said. A single sharp word. "What do you need me to do?" And just like that, we were a team. A united front. Our first move was to get out of the house. I told her about the next phase, cutting off their access completely to heighten their panic. I called Leo. "Phase 3, I said. "We're going dark." We packed a few suitcases. Holly wrote a short, simple email to her parents. "Conrad and I are going to stay with a friend for a week or two. The renovation dust is getting to be too much for my allergies. We'll call you when we're settled." It was a brilliant lie, plausible and mundane. We drove to Leo's apartment, a minimalist loft in the city that felt like a fortress. The moment we were inside, we turned off our phones. The counter-manipulation began less than 12 hours later. They must have tried our phones, gotten no answer, and then called Gavin, who played his part perfectly, telling them we'd packed up and left suddenly. Their only source of information was gone. The window had gone black. They fell back on their old tactics. Emails started flooding my inbox. First from Margaret. "Holly, darling, please call me. I'm so worried. Is everything all right? Is Conrad being difficult? You know you can tell me anything." It was classic gaslighting. Feigning concern while implying I was the source of the problem. Holly read it. Her face like stone, and deleted it without a word. Then came Philip, his approach less subtle. He emailed me directly. "Conrad, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to answer your phone. Holly's mother is sick with worry. Whatever tantrum you're throwing, it's time to end it. Your behavior is irresponsible and childish. Call me immediately." It was a demand, an order from the patriarch who was used to being obeyed. He was trying to reassert his dominance, to bully me back into my box. I deleted it. The real desperation kicked in on day 3. The wire transfer for the land deal was due. They had likely already moved all their money, and their friends' money, into Philip's account, ready to swoop in and steal the deal. But they hadn't heard from me. They didn't know if my deal had officially fallen through. They were sitting on a mountain of cash, with no confirmation that the prize was theirs for the taking. The risk they were taking was suddenly becoming very, very real. The texts and voicemails became a torrent of panicked, manipulative garbage. "Holly, this isn't funny anymore. Your father is having chest pains because of the stress. You need to come home." A lie. We could hear him on our feed, yelling at his broker on the phone. "Conrad, if you've done something to hurt her, so help me God." "Sweetheart, we were just trying to help with the house. We love you so much. Please don't let him turn you against us." This last one, from Margaret to Holly, was the most insidious. It was an attempt to reframe the narrative, to position themselves as the loving victims and me as the manipulative Savangali. But it was too late. Holly had heard their real voices. She'd seen the ugliest parts of their souls, the parts they hid behind Sunday briskets and charitable donations. She picked up her new burner phone, one Leo had provided, and sent a single text back to her mother. I know about the bugs. All of them. Don't contact us again. The silence that followed was more profound than any of their frantic messages. We had just lit the fuse. The power had shifted completely. They were no longer the puppet masters. They were just two aging, terrified people in a big, empty house, staring at a text message that had just turned their entire world to ash. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, and the walls were closing in. The day of the confrontation was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The wire transfer from Philip's investment club to our fictitious holding company had gone through 2 days prior. $3.2 million. Leo confirmed it was sitting safely in an account he controlled, an account that was about to be returned to its rightful, albeit foolish, owners. The hook was set. The trap was sprung. All that was left was to pull back the curtain. Holly and I crafted the invitations with surgical precision. To her parents, it was an email from Holly's account. Mom, Dad, you were right to be worried. Conrad and I need to talk to you about the future. Please come to the house tomorrow at 3 p.m. It's time we cleared the air. It was ambiguous enough to give them a sliver of hope, a chance that their daughter was coming back into the fold. To the 5 members of Philip's investment club, I sent a separate, formal email from a new address under the name Conrad Vance, Managing Partner, Northridge Development. Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for your swift and decisive investment. I'm pleased to announce our acquisition of the Fremont parcel is complete. I'm hosting a small preliminary planning meeting at my residence tomorrow at 3 p.m. to discuss the next steps for the data center project and outline the projected profit schedule. I look forward to meeting Philip's esteemed partners. It was corporate, professional, and promised them exactly what they wanted to hear, that their gamble had paid off. They had no idea they were all being summoned to the same place at the same time. At 2:45 p.m. the next day, Holly and I stood in our living room. The house was clean. The dust of the renovation finally settled. Leo was there, dressed in a sharp suit, a stark contrast to his usual t-shirt and jeans. He had a laptop connected to a large television we had mounted on the wall, the same wall where I'd found the first bug. He gave me a crisp nod. Ready for the show? Born ready, I said, though my heart was hammering. Holly took my hand, her grip firm and steady. Her transformation was complete. She was no longer a daughter caught in the middle. She was a wife standing with her husband, a queen ready to defend her castle. At precisely 3 p.m., 2 cars pulled up. One was Philip and Margaret's Lexus. The other was a Mercedes carrying Bob, Philip's right-hand man in the club, and another investor named Marcus. The rest of the club had confirmed they were minutes behind. Margaret and Philip walked up the driveway first. They looked nervous, but their expressions were arranged into masks of loving concern. Margaret was holding a peace offering, a Tupperware container that I knew held slices of her dry, crumbly brisket. Holly opened the door before they could ring the bell. Mom, Dad, come in, she said, her voice devoid of warmth. They stepped inside, their eyes darting around, trying to read the situation. Their faces fell when they saw me standing there, my arms crossed, and then they saw Leo, a stranger in a suit. Who's this? Philip asked, his eyes narrowing at Leo. This is my associate, I said calmly. Before they could respond, the doorbell rang again. I opened it to find the other 3 members of the investment club standing on our porch. They were all beaming, slapping each other on the back, smelling of money and self-congratulation. Conrad, a pleasure to finally meet you, one of them boomed, shaking my hand vigorously. Philip has told us so much about your brilliant find. The look on Philip's face was a priceless work of art. The blood drained from his cheeks, replaced by a pasty gray pallor. His eyes darted between me and his friends, his mind clearly struggling to understand why his 2 secret worlds were colliding in my living room. Margaret looked utterly bewildered, clutching her brisket like a shield. Gentlemen, Philip, Margaret, please, have a seat, I said, gesturing to the sofas we had arranged to face the television. We have a lot to discuss. They all sat, the investors on one side, buzzing with excitement, and Philip and Margaret on the other, stiff with dread. I stood before them, Holly at my side. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice ringing with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. "I know some of you are here because you believe you've just invested in a lucrative land deal." I looked directly at the investors. "And some of you are here because you're worried about my marriage." I let my gaze settle on Margaret and Philip. "The truth is," I continued, "you're all here because you've been the victims of a crime, and also the perpetrators of one." A nervous chuckle came from the investors. Philip was now sweating visibly. "Let's start with the investment," I said, picking up a remote. "Leo, if you would." Leo hit a key on his laptop. The TV screen flickered to life. It didn't show a map of the Fremont parcel or profit projections. It showed a diagram of our house, my house. Red dots pulsed in the living room, the kitchen, the hallway outside our bedroom. "What is this?" one of the investors asked, confused. "This is a wiring diagram," I explained. "But it's not for electricity. Each of those red dots represents the location of a highly sensitive covert listening device, installed in my home, without my knowledge or consent. Over the past 3 months, a stunned silence fell over the room. The investors looked at Philip, their expressions shifting from confusion to suspicion. Margaret looked like she was going to faint. "These devices," I went on, my voice cold as ice, "were used to illegally spy on my wife and me, to listen to our most private conversations, and the information gathered from that illegal surveillance was then used by Philip here to convince all of you to invest in a land deal." I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "There's just one problem. The land deal doesn't exist." The investors erupted. "What? Philip, what is he talking about? He's lying." Philip sputtered, finding his voice. "He's insane. He's trying to cut you out, to take the deal for himself." "Am I?" I said with a thin smile. "Leo, play the first clip." Leo hit another key. The room was filled with Philip's own voice, piped in through the TV speakers, crisp and clear. It was the recording of him on the phone with Bob. "I've got a source, an impeccable source, on a land deal that's going to pay out 10-1. Then came another clip, of him talking to Margaret. "The boy wonder stumbles into a gold mine. He's cutting Holly out." The arrogance of that man. We played clip after clip. Their hushed plotting, their greed, their self-righteous justification. We played their panic when they thought the deal was falling through. We had documented their entire conspiracy in their own words. The investors sat in stunned, horrified silence. They weren't just victims of a bad tip, they were accessories to a criminal enterprise. When the last clip faded, I turned to Philip. He was ashen, defeated. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. Margaret was openly weeping, her face buried in her hands. "The data center was a lie," I said, my voice quiet. "Now, the windfall was a lie. It was all a story, a performance for an audience I knew was listening. It was a trap, Philip, and you walked right into it." "My money," Bob whispered, his face pale. "Our money, it's gone." "No, it's not," Leo said, speaking for the first time. He turned his laptop around to show them a screen with the bank account information. "All $3.2 million will be wired back to your individual accounts within the hour, minus a small fee for my consulting services, of course." He gave them a predatory smile. The investors looked at Philip with pure, unadulterated hatred. His social standing, his reputation as a financial guru, his friendships, all of it evaporated in that moment. He was a fraud, a fool, and a criminal, and they all knew it. Finally, I looked at Margaret and Philip. "This was never about money," I said. "It was about this." I pointed to the diagram of my house on the screen. "This violation. You didn't trust me. You didn't respect my marriage. You didn't love your daughter. You sought to control her. You bugged our home. You tried to turn her against me. You poisoned everything you touched." Holly stepped forward. "We're not pressing charges," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "On one condition. You disappear from our lives. You will sell your house. You will move out of this town. You will have no contact with me, or Conrad, or our children, ever again. We are done. If I see you, if you call me, if I get so much as a Christmas card, this entire file," she gestured to Leo's laptop, goes directly to the district attorney and the local news. Is that clear? Philip just stared, his mouth opening and closing silently. It was Margaret who finally nodded, her body racked with sobs. I looked at the investors, who were already getting up, their faces a mixture of relief and fury at Philip. I'd suggest you all leave now, I said. Your business here is concluded. They fled without a backward glance, leaving Philip and Margaret alone in the ruins of their lives. Holly and I just stood there and watched them go. The new reality had set in. They had lost, and we had won. Months have passed since that day. The silence in our house is different now. It's not the eerie, humming silence of being watched. It's the deep, peaceful silence of a true sanctuary. The renovation is finished, done by a new contractor, a man I vetted personally. Every room is exactly as Holly and I designed it. It's our home, finally and completely. The nursery is painted a soft, gentle yellow. It's waiting. Holly and I are stronger than ever. The fire we walked through together forged a bond between us that is unbreakable. The last vestiges of her childhood innocence are gone, but in their place is a woman of incredible strength and resolve. I've never loved her more. We heard through the town grapevine, which is mercilessly efficient, about the aftermath for her parents. The investment club disbanded. Philip's former friends crossed the street to avoid him. Their social standing, the thing they valued above all else, was annihilated overnight. They were pariahs. They put their house on the market a week after the confrontation. A for sale sign on their perfect lawn was a more damning headline than any newspaper article could have been. The last we heard, they had moved to a small anonymous town a few states away, their grand life reduced to a quiet, shame-filled exile. They got what they deserved. They weren't punished by me, they were undone by their own greed and arrogance. I just held up a mirror, and they couldn't stand the reflection. And that brings me to why I'm telling you this story. I've learned a few things. I've learned that trust is a fragile, precious thing, and some people see it not as a gift but as a vulnerability to be exploited. I've learned that boundaries are not an act of cruelty, they are the most profound act of self-respect. You teach people how to treat you, and for years, I taught my in-laws that I was willing to be a doormat. The moment I decided to stand up, the whole dynamic shifted. Sometimes the people who scream the loudest about family and love are the ones who are most interested in control. They wrap their manipulation in the language of concern, their surveillance in the language of protection. But real love, real family, doesn't require a listening device. It doesn't thrive on secrets and suspicion. It's built on respect, on the faith that the people you love are capable of living their own lives. What I did was extreme. I know some of you might think I went too far, that my revenge was disproportionate to the crime, and maybe you're right. But when someone turns your home into a prison, when they try to poison your marriage from the inside out, you don't fight back with a polite conversation. You fight back with overwhelming force. You don't just win the battle, you end the war. It wasn't about revenge, until it was, and then it was about ensuring they could never ever hurt us again. And on that front, I have absolutely no regrets. So I want to ask you, what would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever had to deal with a family member who refused to respect your boundaries? Let me know your story in the comments below. I think we could all learn from each other, and if you found my story compelling, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for listening.